Hi, my name is Yasmin Etahadie, and today I will be interviewing Miss Gail Bindley-Taylor on behalf of the NGO DPI Executive Committee. Ms. Bindley-Taylor is a broadcast journalist serving as the Information Officer in the NGO Relations Cluster of the DPI for the United Nations Secretariat. Over the years, she has held several positions in the broadcasting field and interviewed almost every head of state and foreign minister of the Caribbean. She also served as the head of public information for the United Nations mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and worked as a senior producer for programs in Asia and the Caribbean at the United Nations Radio Service. Welcome, Ms. Bindley-Taylor, and thank you for accepting the invitation to today's interview.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You have been serving at the Department of Public Information for the last 5 years, but your career in broadcasting started over 30 years ago in Guyana. What brought you into broadcasting?
It was happenstance, actually. I was at university, and it was my first summer, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do in the summer. I had worked for 2 years before going into university in a bank. Didn't like it at all. Loved the people, didn't like the job. And wasn't sure what I really wanted to do. So during the summer, one of my friends said to me, would you come to the studio, because he worked at the studio, and do a voiceover for me? So I said, sure, why not? I'd never done a voiceover, and I thought, sure, if you think I can do it. And he said, sure, you have a great voice. So I went to the studio and I did a voiceover, and someone happened to hear it and must have spoken to someone in the studio who was at a managerial level. And they all of a sudden I got a call saying, would you be interested in doing an audition for us? And I was like, an audition? Okay. So I did the audition and they hired me on the spot, which was amazing, really, because I was living at the time in Guyana in South America. I came from Trinidad and Tobago, so I had a huge Trinidadian accent, which I still have. And I wasn't sure how that was going to go down in a society which had a very different accent to start with and was very different. But the general manager who took me on at the time continues to be my mentor. Still alive, and has been an amazing mentor to me throughout my career. And that's how I started in radio, happenstance.
Looking back, what were the highlights you have experienced?
That's a long time to think of. That's almost 32 years. I've had so many different highlights, to be very honest. I think the first year was exciting because I knew nothing about broadcasting, and I was just thrown into it feet first, and had great trainers who themselves had been trained. They had come under the British system in large measure, and a lot of them had been involved with the BBC or had been to the BBC at some point. So I had really great training, and they stuffed everything into me that they could in a year, because I just, you're young, you're just in college, and I just soaked everything up in that year, and I did everything from on air. I worked the board, and if you know anything about broadcasting, I actually at that stage, literally worked the board for myself, put myself on air, and did everything from disc jockeying to playing music in the evening on an evening program, to reading news, to going on outside remote broadcasts, which were live, which I loved and which were exciting. And that was my first year, really exciting. And then I went back home to Trinidad, and because I was going back to university there. And there, through my mentor, who was in Guyana, there was a connection between him and the general manager at the station that I went to in Trinidad. They had actually worked under each other in Guyana the general manager of Trinidad Broadcasting, had worked as the general manager of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. So they knew each other. And he gave me a recommendation, the general manager of Ghana Broadcasting at the time, and I went to what was then Radio Trinidad and under Peter Hesketh. And again, there I had a wonderful set of training with great people, great engineers, terrific announcers, and I had such a great experience, and in a sense was a little bit of an anomaly because I was probably one of the first people that worked there who came in and was doing a Bachelor of Arts degree. And it was a little unusual because at that time, you came up from the bottom and worked your way up to the top, and I was sort of on that path, but I already was halfway through my degree. And as I finished my degree, I had another first, and that was that the general manager said to me one day, how would you like to be part of a new program that is opened for people who have finished their, bachelor's degree and want to look at seriously doing a master's diploma in communications? And I was like, great, that's a terrific idea. So I went off to Jamaica, Mona, and did that for a year. And then came back and worked on two different sides. I worked behind the microphone on one hand because I read news, which was one of my strengths. But at the same time, I started on the production end. I started to produce my own programming, which was exciting. And that made me cover several elections. I covered the elections in Jamaica in 1980. And that, I never forget, that was so exciting. And that opened a whole new world, because all of a sudden I was part of management as well in my late 20s, which was, a little intimidating at the time, but was exciting at the same time. And then it was there that someone at the UN came one day and heard me on air. And they were looking for someone from the Caribbean. And I was asked whether I was interested, and they interviewed me. I didn't really think much would come of it because I thought the whole Caribbean is applying for this one position at the UN in New York. I doubt I'm going to get that. And at the time I was fairly comfortable because I had also made the transition into television. And again, that was happenstance. Somebody was going on leave, one of the hosts of the morning talk program, and they needed someone to sub for her for 6 weeks. And they asked me whether I was interested. I'd never done television, and I said, well, I guess I could try. And I loved it because I love interviewing people. I love finding out about things, and I'm curious by nature, so it was just match made in heaven. And I stayed with them for 6 weeks, and at the end of 6 weeks they said, would you like to stay on as a freelancer?
So, do you have the feeling it was destiny that brought you to that path?
Absolutely.
So, did you feel you had a mission?
Well, initially I wasn't sure that I had a mission. Initially, I think it was just about serving the public, and particularly as I got into the whole area of news and news reading, and becoming a news anchor eventually for television. And I worked then in both television and radio. And that was exciting because it was like two different worlds. I would leave one job and go to the other. But it was a really exciting way of meeting people, and interviewing people and learning really intimate things about their lives. But I never saw it as a calling until I came to the UN, I think in large measure. And then I saw it very differently, because I saw it then as serving a public from a completely different standpoint, and serving the world in a different kind of way. And then I saw it more as a vocation, because I think it is something to which you're called, because it takes a lot out of your time. It takes a lot out of you emotionally. when you think about covering an issue, and I think of all the travel that I did for the UN, both for the Caribbean and towards the end when I worked as the senior producer for Asia. Some of the stories I did were amazing. I mean, I did the first 6-part series on Law of the Sea and did, interviews with people who were really experts in their fields. Some of them have now passed on. But it was an exciting series because Law of the Sea was now becoming a topic, and it was trying to make people understand the importance of what the sea means to their countries and what's in the sea and under the sea, and that made me see information in a different light, bringing information to people, and showing them sides of the UN that they may not normally see. I did something with the Rohingya, for example, in Bangladesh, and met those people where they lived the day after the Sidr had hit Bangladesh, the last terrible one they had about 7 or 8 years ago. And you see a side of people that was really interesting. Here were these people who were from Myanmar, and they wanted to, in their hearts, they would love to go back. But on the other hand, they're very grateful to Bangladesh for keeping them there. So they're very torn between, do they stay there? And they had been there when I met them for more than 27 years, but still in their hearts, hoped one day they'd be able to go home. So you have interesting things like that you bring from one part of the world to expose to another part of the world. And that gives you a unique sense of responsibility as a journalist.
So having this unique experience to work at the UN as a broadcaster, what do you feel have you experienced as challenges?
I think the main challenge is explaining the UN to people outside of the UN. Because for people who don't necessarily, and even when you look at people who live in the US, a lot of them outside of New York may not necessarily know that much about the UN. And so it is bringing the UN to people where they are. In some instances, it's easy, because if there is a UN presence on the ground and they're aware of it, it's much easier. But there are places where sometimes even with the UN there, they're not quite sure, what are they doing? What are they contributing to my life, and in what way? So I think what radio does is it gives, and television, it gives an opportunity for people to see the way in which the UN impacts their lives, and they themselves to see the way in which they can in a sense become involved with the UN, and that we're not just a thing way over there in New York that comes and helps when there is trouble, but that we also help in other ways, to give them a better life.
What would you consider to be your greatest achievement?
My greatest achievement. That's a tough one. My greatest achievement is probably very personal. It's probably my daughter. That's my greatest achievement. Because when I look at her, she just turned 21. And I think as a mother, it gives me a sense of pause to think that I brought this person into the world, and I look at what she has become, and it makes me terrifically proud. And that's, to me, has been my greatest achievement. I think if I had other achievements, I've been able to, especially in this particular position, to mentor a lot of young people who have come to work with the NGO Relations section as interns. And it's been wonderful to hear them after they've left our section say, thank you so much for what you've done in helping me to move forward in the world, and to, take with me my experience from NGO relations and move it into the real world. that to me is an achievement if you're able to give back in that way. And there are other little things of which I'm proud. I'm really proud of a lot of the work I have done that has touched people in little ways.
Can you give us some examples for that?
I always remember two guys I sing in my church choir, and two of the guys who I never really talked much about what I did at the UN. And one day they came really very excited, and they said to me, "We heard you in the Caribbean." So I said, "What do you mean you heard?" So they said, "You didn't tell us you were a broadcaster." I said, "Well, yeah." And they said, "Well, we heard a program. We were traveling in a taxi in Grenada or St. Vincent. I can't remember which island, but they were in one of the islands, and they were traveling, and they heard a UN program that was being aired, and they were listening to it in the taxi, and they were like, 'We know her.'" That made me feel really good. I've interviewed, as I've said, lots of heads of state and government, but it's the little people that you interview, and if I think of the Rohingya refugees, I always remember they're saying, "Make sure you tell our story. Make sure you tell our story so other people know what's happening with us and know that we're here and know what's happening to us." And those are things that you take with you. Wherever you are, you take them with you. My coverage of elections in Jamaica, my coverage of the opening of the Tobago House of Assembly many, many years ago. But I remember it because it was a really proud moment for Tobago. And for me, it was a great moment to be part of history. Or the programs that I did when the first Prime Minister of the country died, and I did a documentary which wiped me out, I remembered, completely, because I was doing it sort of all day and all night to get it on the air. And to see it referred to, I think somebody sent me a little notification a couple months ago that somebody had listened to it and thought after all these years that it was a nice little piece of history. That's great.
During your time working at the UN, what do you feel have been the most significant changes in the field of broadcasting?
Lots have changed. When I came here, we were divided into units, but not language units. We were divided by region. So you had the Caribbean region, you had the Europe, you had the Asia and the Pacific. It was more along regional lines, and the Caribbean had come in as part of North America and wanted to have its own identity, because they felt that they had been independent countries for some time and they wanted to have their own voice. So when I came here, it was to help to give the Caribbean its own distinctive voice as one of the two radio producers that we had at the time. And at the time, we had the luxury of two radio producers, a third producer who worked on a freelance basis, and two production assistants. Well, that changed over time. We moved from the whole question of regionalism to language units. And so today, you have the French unit and the English unit and the Russian unit, and in the 6 official languages. You now have Kiswahili and Portuguese that have been added to include those language speakers who represent large numbers of people in Portuguese speakers and Swahili speakers in the world. So that has been a major change. The technology has changed as well. When I came here, there's no such thing as social media. Now there is. And so now the approach is more multimedia. You don't just do a radio story, but that radio story may have a television spin-off and a press piece to it and pictures that go with it. And, so that pictures and sound have merged in a completely different way. it's very different, and I think of when I first came, the type of machinery that we had then was very different to the type that we have now. We didn't edit at our desks. Now you can edit at your desk. You don't need an engineer to edit in the same way. So the technology has changed, and that has freed up people to tell stories in more innovative ways.
Talking about changes, you will be leaving the United Nations in 3 weeks, as you said. What will be your next steps?
That is all spinning around in my head at the moment. I would like to go home and see what there is at home because, I have always grown up in a family that gave back. And I would love to give back, and I'd love to give back to my home country.
And home country is Trinidad
and Tobago. In whatever way I can, because I think it's made me who I am. And I would very much like to give back to it some of what it's given to me. But I've also spent 30 years in this country. And this is also home in a different way. So I am at the moment looking to explore opportunities here as well. I would love to work with juveniles, with young people, because I think they have minds that are open and are ready for anything. And having worked a lot with interns, it's made me really interested in working with young people in whatever way I can use my communication skills. I'd love to work with my church as well because I'm an Episcopalian and I would love to give back anything I can to my church. So I have several things that I would like to do. I've always been interested in juvenile justice and I have no clue what I would like to do there, but it is an area that I've always had an interest in and would love to work with. So perhaps, the NGO world is not that far. I've worked with them for 5 years. I have come to know them and love them in a very special way. So who knows, there may be opportunities there as well. So lots of things to think.
And we will see where destiny takes you from here. Thank you very much, Ms. Bindley-Taylor, for your time and for that interview.
Thank you so much.